Before we start, a little bit of an intro. As Tim mentioned earlier, Tessian has been securing the human layer since 2017, working with some of the largest organizations across the world. And I think the really important part that myself and Georgie get to experience and have the privilege of experience is our customers play such an important role in contributing to our vision for securing the human layer. Mark was a prime example of that, how he's helping us challenge our thinking about training and measuring
I need
culture.
people who meet these things.
Today, we're excited to welcome 4 of our customers to the stage to share some of their experiences and their thought processes around some key challenges at the moment. So we have Lloyd's of London, Herbert Smith Freehills, HFW and Clifford Chance all joining us up here today. I'm not going to introduce everyone individually because they're going to do that in a sec. But what I would say is hopefully we're going to have a real range of opinions on the panel today. The one thing that they all share in common is that they use the Tessian human layer security platform to protect their email networks against insider threats, accidental data loss, and inbound email threats such as spear phishing. Anyway, let's get going. First off, I think it's really important to note that, as I said, there's a range of different opinions here. So hopefully it's not just going to be security. We have risk, we have privacy and compliance. What I'd like to do to begin with is go around and everyone to give a brief introduction of themselves, the angle that they'll be coming from, and then we're going to dive into 3 key topics that we'll be discussing today. So, Georgie, do you want to take us away?
Yeah. Hi everyone, so I'm Georgie. I previously to Tessian was a cybersecurity consultant at BAE Systems, and then I joined Tessian as the first customer success manager about 2 years ago now, and since then I've been managing the relationship primarily with UK legal and then also our finance firms in South Africa.
Hi, I'm Jamie. I'm at Herbert Smith Freehills. I head up our information security team. Been there 5 years, so my responsibility is within general counsel and risk. People security is very much part of my agenda. Previously, I was at KPMG doing client consultancy on cyber.
Hi, I'm Timur. I head up the data governance and privacy function for Lloyd's of London. My background is all data, really, mainly focusing on data governance. I created data governance function within Orange and EE before I moved to Lloyd's, did the same thing. Have a passion for data quality, data management and all data matters. Right now focusing on within the data governance, on data governance model, on the cultural work as well within that, and data quality and privacy and data protection.
Hi, I'm Emily Fisher. I'm the Data Privacy Manager for Clifford Chance. I've been with the firm for about 2 years. Prior to joining Clifford Chance, I had an array of experience in data privacy, including in online dating and American whiskey, which of course prepared me nicely for corporate law.
A great combo as well. Dating and whiskey.
Very complimentary.
Yeah, I think so. Hello, I'm Mark Parr. I'm the CIO at HFW. I've been in post 6 months, so I've just passed my probation. I'm delighted they keep me on. Before that, I spent the last 4 years at KPMG, where I started as a consultant selling cyber, and then realised that we weren't very good at eating our own dog food, so moved internally and became the CISO for KPMG UK. I'm only 28, but being a CISO makes you look like this, which I've now is why I've taken on a CIO role. Yeah, that's probably enough.
Very pertinent to one of my questions later. Not how old are you? The impact of like the risk on a CISO. The first topic that I want to touch on is every single day it seems like there is a new article or a new risk that is in the media, whether it's mainstream media, whether it's the security media, or at least being spoken around at the office. It's really, really hard to keep up with. What are the main risks that are top of mind for you guys in 2020?
Well, I'll start. I was late here this morning for exactly that reason. If you think of CIA as the sort of tenets of how we're providing technology to support our business, the availability bit is something we sometimes forget about in cyber. Mm-hmm. And this morning, last night we sent out an email to all staff, prepare to work from home. Take your laptop home, test out your communications, make sure you can work. Thinking potentially we're going to close our office in London or out in Hong Kong, whatever it might be. That then kicked off a whole amount of work that meant my continuity plan was tested to the max. So I finally got offline about 2 this morning, was back in again this morning to make sure I was picking up with Hong Kong. So for us, it's not just about the technical risk or the fact there might be more phishing attacks, or it might be insider threat. And you've got to think across the whole gamut of the threat range. And we've seen that now with what's happening with coronavirus and how that's impacting on how our people are working.
Yeah, absolutely. And perhaps, Emily, you can share from kind of a privacy perspective, you know, what you're really, what you're not necessarily concerned about, the things that are top of mind for you and you're tackling from your strategy perspective.
Top of mind for me when we're looking at the threat landscape is how privacy laws and regulations overlay on how we respond to them. So, I mean, obviously, I think everyone in the audience will be familiar that we have a relatively new and untested regulation. We have a changing global landscape with laws being enacted in multiple jurisdictions. We have the derogations. So we have a changing landscape. We have regulators who haven't quite decided where they come down on certain issues, and overlaid onto that you have this absolute obligation to maintain security and respond to threats appropriately whilst respecting privacy rights and obligations at the same time, and that's a challenge.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a real balancing act, isn't it? And I think it's all about where you focus your efforts as well on what you think is going to be, you know, that potentially lethal, you know, event that happens that could really like harm your security posture. Jamie, what about from a kind of like more industry specific angle? When you're thinking about cyber threats coming from the legal sector, do you see those risks as ones that kind of spread across all different sectors and are applicable to all companies of certain sizes, or do you also have like real focus on legal specific risks?
Well, I mean, we kind of put ourselves in the professional services bucket. I think one of the challenges we have is we have a lot of external communications with clients, and those are large organisations, you know, FTSE 100 companies. And despite not being particularly regulated as an industry in legal, we're almost regulated by proxy by our clients. And that is something we have to keep up with. We have a relatively modest sized security team, so we need to really focus on those technologies and behaviours that give us the best bang for buck. Legal's still relatively traditional way of communicating, so email is still king. We have a kind of a diverse set of lawyers, you know, from different generations, and that gives us a lot of challenges with new apps, with cloud, and people wanting to share information. Whereas the more old school, you know, they're still sticking with paper. We still get people who print out their emails and give their markup to their PA to send back.
It must be difficult, drawing on what Emily was saying around the amount of regulation and like statutory instruments that we're seeing in this area, combined with your customers mandating, and I see this a lot across the law firms, but also other companies as well, with customers mandating certain security practices as a prerequisite. It must be hard to like steer the direction of your security strategy in a meaningful direction when you have things coming at you from all angles. How have you effectively done that at HSF?
Sorry, was that?
Yes. Yeah. How do you cope with those competing pressures to be able to still lay a strategy and kind of like go towards that rather than just doing what you're told from like a customer perspective and also a regulatory perspective?
Ooh, that's a very hard question. It's very difficult. So, I mean, we split security at HSF between IT and risk. And for me, the biggest investment we make is in people and training, giving them the right knowledge to be able to make the right decisions. It's interesting what Mark was saying earlier about giving them that confidence level to make those risk-based decisions on their own, because we're a small team and we just can't be there all the time. But also, allied with that is giving them the technology that is giving them the right prompts or the right knowledge at the right time, rather than some kind of noisy pop-up that's sitting on your desktop. So we try and be in this situation. We've had a recent ambient awareness campaign, for example, where we've put items kind of in the areas where people are going to be doing the most work. So printing, or when they're in client meeting rooms, just little jogs of people's memory so that they keep security front of mind.
Yeah, at the right time as well.
I think Jamie made a really good point, and by empowering your employees more, you're sort of taking the burden off not only them, but your information security team so that they can focus on the more strategic elements.
Yeah, absolutely. I personally see from working with the range of customers that we do, we get to see a really good cross-section of how organizations approach this. Some of the most, I'd say, like innovative security strategies I see, it's about not just empowering employees to have the tools to provide the relevant prompts at the relevant times, for example, but it's also putting it on managers and making managers realize that actually security is part of your remit. It's not necessarily that you have to be a security expert, but you give them the tools to be able to see what their employees are doing, because crucially they have the context as well.
I think for me as well, there's an extra bit to this. There's understanding how you get the business to buy in. And Mark mentioned this. We talk about budget. If I'm going to go to the board and say I need more money, it's not good enough to just say I'm going to empower my people. I'm going to empower the people to be able to be more secure. That's not good enough. So you have got to have a proper strategy that's aligning you to something. In legal, the SRA perhaps don't have the teeth yet that we're seeing from maybe the ICO or the FCA yet, but that will come. Equally, we're seeing much more in the space of client assurance questionnaires and client assurance visits, but they're all based around frameworks. So if I think, for me, the strategy of where we want to take information security, I don't particularly like the C word, I don't think it really makes any sense, but anyway, if it's cyber, where I want to take that is I've got to follow a framework, or at least point in that direction. And so as a global organization, I will think, well, there are one or two. It's either ISO or NIST. And if I base my strategy around that and take us on that journey, well, part of that is the human layer. Part of that is empowering the people. But if I want to have tools such as Tessian, I've got to have a strategy that the business understands. And therefore, it's the return of investment discussion. So if you don't have a strategy, you can't talk about return of investment. You can't see where it's going to make money for the business. I won't get buy-in from the board. And that's as simple as it is. And
specifically on that point, when you're talking about return on investment and trying to the board trying to quantify and justify in their mind whether an investment is worth it, do you think they're coming at it from the angle of they want to see the mitigation of certain events happening, or do you think they're yet thinking about security as an enabler that can actually really empower employees to do their best work in the workplace?
Yeah, so that's a huge challenge, and it's trying to get that mindset change that it is an enabler, and actually security runs as a thread through the golden thread through everything we do. And if we're going to gain more work, our aspiration as a firm is to get into the top 20. If we want to get there, we've got to win more work. Mm-hmm. You're only going to win more work if you're reputable. And you're only going to be reputable if you're known as you're going to have a good information security sort of posture of the firm. So it's selling it in that way now. If I can demonstrate we've won this client because they like the way that we dealt with cyber, then that's a really useful, powerful tool for me to take to the board or to the business.
Yeah, I completely agree. In fact, Jamie, I think it was you that said to me a few months ago that more and more security teams are being brought into pitches, and they're kind of a chip on the table to actually win deals.
It's using it as a competitive advantage, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I think that's a huge shift between security is there to serve the business and just ensure that nothing bad happens. It's now, no, everyone in this room obviously knows the importance of data, but also now all of your users really know the importance of data, and your customers do. So it's really important to show them that you're not just thinking about it as a support function, but as an enablement function, ultimately. Timur, you mentioned kind of some of the, your interest in data and your role at Lloyd's. To what extent is human error to what extent does human error play that devil's advocate with your desire to have a data set which is protected and clean, etc.?
Andrew, this is a very timely question, actually, because it's a very hot topic at everyone's agenda within Lloyd's. I think it's a journey, and especially when talking about Lloyd's, we've got lots of manual processes, we've got great traditions, we've got certain ways of working, and that could be a potential for being more exposed to the human element within data protection and data breaches. So it's an area that we're hugely focusing on. And what we are trying to say is show the positives and also focus on the people. People really important, no matter how many controls, policies, training you provide, procedures you create, processes. If you're going to be spoon-feeding data protection and data confidentiality to every single employee within the organization, you will not achieve a lot. But what we are trying to do is to change the mindset is to create a data protection person within every single team and make them aware of their accountabilities and responsibilities. Now, this will take time, but we don't want to just rely on policies and employee guides, because people get sick of keep reading all these policies and will forget about them, as some of my colleagues mentioned. But what we are trying to do, and it's a very difficult thing to do, is to build up their judgment capability, to be able to deal with different scenarios, to be able to respond in better ways all the time. We are living in a digital world that things can rapidly be changing, and people will need to be responding well when it comes to different examples and scenarios they can face on a day-to-day basis. I can assure you, and from my experience, and I'm very hands-on on like all the data incidents and stuff like that, it's always something new that could happen, something that you can never think about. Things can really be basic, things can really be complicated, but the human error is one of the key things that you can see in every single breach or incidents, that not just within Lloyd's, but anywhere else. And from, I've been to Frankfurt in Jan and talked to my colleagues in the Data Governance European conference, and it was really good conversations about different scenarios and how people look at this from different aspects, and the common thing is the human element of it and how to build this judgment capability.
And it's important to make it relevant as well. So you mentioned, going to see people. You don't really get through to people unless you're in front of them, I've found. And so, think about things like small roadshows and go to your offices and talk to your people. People are generally curious to know about this topic, but they don't necessarily understand it, or understand it on a practical level. You talk about all these buzzwords and make sure your VPN's turned on, but you don't connect to dodgy Wi-Fi's. I mean, practically, what does that mean? Is this dodgy? Is that dodgy? Can I connect using my hotspot? Or keep it practical and get in front of people, because there are obviously cultural issues that may vary your knowledge.
I think it's a really good point that Tim, you made, and Jamie, you expanded on, that the problem with human error is that it's going to be prevalent in every single organisation, and Mark touched on that earlier. You can't patch that necessarily. Like, you're never going to be able to completely stop human error. So you need to create a culture, but also supporting tools to help people feel like they're more safe at work, and also engage in it in a way. I think from my experience at least, even in the last 3 years of us building Tessian, we've seen the tide has turned in terms of users wanting to engage about security, and no longer thinking it was just a chore and something they kind of had to do as a tick box exercise. I know, for example, I used to be a lawyer, and I remember going to some data protection training, and in fact it was about spearphishing, and ironically I now work for a company that solves spearphishing. But I was like, I'll never fall for this. And it's like, I think now the attitudes have changed, which means that people are actually engaging in how sophisticated these things are. Which brings me nicely on to the next topic that I wanted to discuss. And I guess it's centered around a lot of what we've been speaking about, that humans, in fact, I think Mark said, it kind of doesn't really wash that humans are the weakest link in an organization. That they are, but they're also your greatest asset to an organization, especially dealing with the companies that we have here. We're all a product of the intellectual property that our humans create. It's the same at Tessian. How do you effectively, and Jamie, I'd love you to kick this off, because I know that you guys have been doing some really innovative stuff at HSF, but how do you effectively engage your employees in a way that is really relevant to them and kind of, I guess, captures this momentum that we're seeing amongst the user base in terms of they have an awareness of the data? Tim mentioned that policies don't work. How have you approached training in a way that has really swept up your user base? Because I know you have.
Well, I mean, policies don't work, but you need to have them. You need to set the guidelines and have a common understanding of where your risk appetite sits. It's kind of the implementation of that that's the tricky bit. I mean, as we were saying earlier, it's about having different methods and different ways of speaking with people, both in the situation and more formally in kind of face-to-face or e-learning topics. As I said, something we've really focused on is making it very relevant for the people. So previously we had a package from VinciWorks that was just going through the practical applications of cybersecurity, and we weren't getting much take up. It was pretty much the same as the other compliance modules. So we were fortunate enough to get some budget to develop a module ourselves and really focus on a day in the life of the lawyer, actually following them through from when they get up, when they're mobile, when they're on the train, client situations, and there's so many just easy to understand risks that come about, or you can play into that scenario that people will really relate to. It's not about replaying all the policy and do's and don'ts. If you can make people understand that they take risks every minute of the day, which we all do obviously, then I think that helps to engage them and make it interesting.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's technically a dry subject.
What's in it for me, isn't it? It's what's in it for me.
Completely.
So something we ran at Christmas was the 12 days of Christmas. So every day we give them a bit of advice to take home. Because actually, if you work securely at home and you speak to my kids, they get thrashed over. There's an Apple update. You've got to do it now. Don't mess. So if you think like that at home, you will bring that to work. So that's what we focus on. And we started with the Black Friday sales, Black Monday, whatever those. Cyber Monday, Black Fridays, whatever, those sales, we started with them and we gave some advice around that about how you could shop securely. And then we started into Christmas, if you're shopping online, how you can protect yourself, how you can think about when you're at home. And then you start to bring in it. So they're learning what's in it for me. Yeah. Why is this good for me to learn? And then when you come to work and say to them, shut your machine down at the end of the day, they're starting to go, oh, actually, my performance is going to be better tomorrow. My machine will be better because it'll have the patches, it'll work. They start to then see why they're getting something from it, and it's not just then, security bashing them over the head with a stick and say you've got to pass this every year, otherwise, we're not going to do any work. I think that's key.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
I was just going to say it's a combination of a few things. I can give you an example from my experience. When I started in 2015, I looked at policies. I thought policies were overcomplicated. As an owner of all the data policies within Lloyd's, I simplified them, made them a bit more relevant to people's minds and mindset and processes. We also produced lots of guides, like 1-2 page, that you can easily read, and then it's more relevant. We created processes, procedures to show how you're going to be, because the policy mainly talk about the what, but the procedure, the process document talks about the how you're actually going to be doing it. And that's about the what's in it for me. We created a data protection raising awareness campaign, which included different activities, from writing articles, but in a different way. We're trying to be a salespeople, really, and sell this. And I remember 5 years ago, I started all these articles and blogs internally within Lloyd's by saying, protecting you, protecting Lloyd's. And that's something that everyone liked now, the comms team using it every time they talk about data protection. It's about you first. It's not just about the organization. You as an individual, you are very important to us, and that's why you need to listen to us. Then we started talking about data protection in a different way. So I engage with some people in the US and introduce some anime cartoon clips that can last for 2-3 minutes each one. So you're munching a sandwich, you don't need to read a boring document, you hit the play button and a cartoon clip will start showing you something, telling you a story, and that would leave something in your mind that you will keep thinking about it. Basic things, from leaving notes on your desk, clear screen, clear desk policy, all these things, passwords, laptops usage at home. But the key thing for me, and back talking about the judgment will lead to people who will be able to take the right decision very quickly when there are different circumstances and things are changing very much on a daily basis. What you will end up with is lots of flexibility for people to think about and space for them to act. The coronavirus is one example, when now almost every single employee cautious in taking laptops home on a daily basis. They used to leave it until weekend, probably Friday, they take it home. But now most of us take the laptop because you don't know what might happen tomorrow. That then, you need people to think, not just the data team, but you need people to start thinking this is an increased risk potential increase of laptop lost incidents, because I'm going to be taking it home every day, and I'm going to be going to the pub, I'm going to be going to visit a friend, might lose it in a train. And that's how people start thinking about the consequences and being more proactive rather than being
It
reactive.
connects with their personal circumstance.
I think one of the things that we've looked at as part of our strategy is similar to the rest of the panel, is the bite size, the easy to digest, very targeted and relevant messages. So we've been looking at podcasts, short videos, email updates across different media channels, so that it can be digested quickly, easily, and it's very targeted. So the podcasts are with different subject matter experts or heads of department, very, very relevant and with people's peers, rather than just somebody from security or privacy
Mandating something.
talking to camera and saying, here are the principles. That doesn't really help anybody.
Kind of like going on that strand a little bit further, to what extent, like how important is diversity, not just in your security team, but also, I mean, you mentioned a bit about diversity of approach, right? And people consume information different ways, and you need to break it up into ways that everyone is going to understand. But to what extent can you do that if you don't have effective diversity on the team?
I think diversity is absolutely essential. So our information security and cyber teams are hugely diverse. I think they have the most women of any department in IT, but also from other areas of diversity as well. I mean, personally, the privacy team is quite diverse. So I come from a legal background. I have a whole array of experience in investment banking and American whiskey and compliance. I was a telecoms engineer for a period of time. But then my colleague, who I work quite closely with, comes from an IT background. And so from a privacy perspective, you have kind of both halves of the whole there. I can talk to somebody in HR because I've been a HR advisor in my past. I know what motivates them, what challenges they face, and I think that's essential to be a trusted advisor and somebody who can actually tap into the mindset of the person that you're advising, rather than simply saying compliance says no.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, no, I think to summarise like what everyone said, and then also what I hear from our customers, everyone has their different techniques of raising security awareness and improving their security posture, but the two common themes are cadence, and that's like the bite-sized, kind of delivering it in bite-sized pieces, and also relevance and making it customised to your specific firm.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. Moving on, I think we touched on this earlier. The 28-year-old at the end touched on this earlier. But being a cyber or a security, a risk, a compliance, privacy professional is really, really hard. You're constantly trying to fight away the bad things that are happening, and you're living in a world where you're, potentially only moments away from the next bad thing happening. So let's end on a positive note and hopefully some forward-looking insight into what we see coming and what we're excited about in the industry. Jamie, innovation in cyber, how's it changed over the last 5 years since you've been at HSF? And have you seen a big change, or is it kind of like you're more pushing towards maybe it's like your approach to the kind of companies that you're working with to solve these risks?
Well, it's been a big enough challenge in the last 5 years just to get the culture to go up in the firm, to be honest. And we're still focusing on some of the absolute basics and essentials. And I think it's easy to get distracted by sexy technology and the latest thing. You still have to make sure you've got a good patching regime and you're speaking to your people about the latest threats and they've got the right knowledge. But looking forward, I think technology can help. We're at a good point, I think, in that curve, in that it's becoming actually useful now, and it's not a lot of hype and talk. It's actually, there is cyber-based AI, machine learning that can just give you better return, I think, than just the noisy pop-ups or DLP, for example. So that is good, and it's good for a small team like mine to be able to have an element of set and forget, rather than having to rely on rule-based technology. For me, one of the opportunities for us is cloud. It's an opportunity, but it's also obviously a risk for us. again, it's having that democratization of security and being able to rely on kind of a bigger good to protect us all. So I'm very much invested in using that cloud journey to help protect the firm and our people. But obviously, it's a huge challenge for the team to understand, how we go about that, and in the context of our clients as well and our regulators, which I'm also responsible for. That's also something that's quite complex, but we are making inroads into that.
Yeah, no, really interesting. Mark, you mentioned that your journey at KPMG before, where I imagine you had a huge amount of exposure to different products, different initiatives, and I guess when I talk about innovation, it extends beyond technology and products. Timur, you said, I think was a really interesting point earlier, you have to be in sales to be in security and effectively educate a workforce. There are loads of innovations in that sense as well. What are the key kind of like innovations that you're seeing and are excited about in the industry?
So you see, we've gone away from the technology just being AV or something bolted on the end of IT. So you're seeing a lot more technology that's about the people. So your product is a really good example of that. And I think that's a really interesting, seeing how that's playing out now, much more about how do we get the security wrap around our people. But I think fundamentally to all this, the innovation will be how do we continue to engage our people on this journey so they don't become fatigued by it, they don't get bored by it, they don't forget it. I want it to be intrinsic to what they do, but not to hold them back. I want them to be engaged in it, but not to be so engaged that they don't want to do anything. And it's how do you do that innovatively as we carry on? Because we're doing the vignettes now, we're doing the podcast, we're doing the little drop, gamification, all this wonderful stuff. At some point, that will become the same as PowerPoint was 3 years ago. So we need to keep thinking about how do we engage them on that, and how do we engage them in a way that, I mean, you talk about the diversity, absolutely right. How do I give everybody what they need? And it's got to become a magnet for talent, hasn't it? If I want to get good talent into my firm, they've got to look at the technology offering, including the security aspect, and want to be part of that. So it's not good enough anymore to just give them a laptop, a phone, and say, off you go, you're going to be secure because you've got VPN. It's got to be much more than that now. And that's where the innovation challenges are coming, is how do we make it a real differentiator? Certainly for my firm, how do I get the best people to come and work with us versus the best people going to our peers?
How do you do that when security is or your security strategy and the things that you're working on, the technologies you use, is often quite confidential and something you don't want to shout about? Yeah. How do you effectively show a culture of innovation and fast-moving tech?
Yeah, and demonstrating the security as an enabler to all of that as well. It's very difficult.
Yeah.
And I get really frustrated. We have an innovation lab, and when they come back and say, we want to buy this new shiny bit of tin, this new foldy thing, that's not innovation. Innovation is about thinking about how you do something differently to get a better product than you had before, not just about buying the technology that overwraps it. So that is a heck of a challenge.
Yeah.
I don't know either yet, so if anybody does, please do. I'll send it to Mark, and Mark and I meet for coffee, so when I ask him about his product, he can tell me.
I actually think the answer is to sit on panels at cool events like the Human Layer Security Summit.
Absolutely.
And then all the developers and security professionals want to come and work for you. Emily, one thing that seems, again, like it's quite a hopeful outlook for risk and compliance and the security posture of organizations in general is, I described it as the turning of the tide in the user base in terms of understanding the risks, but then also the board level attention, which Mark alluded to. Surely that's good. Surely we're moving in the right direction, and we're getting the attention that we deserve in terms of implementing successful strategies.
Yeah, I think attention and awareness of what we're trying to achieve is absolutely essential. And we were talking about how do you get people on board with that. From my very particular perspective, what's also important is convincing people that you're rolling out these solutions in an appropriate way, so that you're not overly infringing on the personal aspects of their role. You're not over monitoring. You're not. It's not a Big Brother scenario. It has to be, to use the buzzwords, necessary, proportionate, and relevant. And once you can convince people that actually, you're doing this in the right way, they will absolutely be on board with it. And I think the industry has a journey to go on to get to that point, but we're definitely on the way there.
Yeah, I think it's it's definitely a journey, isn't it? It's not binary saying we have board support, we can now do whatever we want. It's also, it's like board and user support. It's about laying the first bit of the foundation, and building that trust, and then building on top of that.
And I think there's some alignment between historic approaches to cybersecurity, simply we have to do this, let's roll it out, it has to be done, to actually how are we going to do it, and how do we manage the transparency piece, and how are we monitoring the outputs from it. It's all absolutely essential to make sure you're doing it in the right way.
Mm-hmm.
I think one of the main requests I hear from our customers is give me the high-level data that I can take to the board, give me automated reporting, and that's just testament to the fact that these are becoming more of a discussion with the board, and that they are interested in it. So yeah. I
think also on that, what's so important for at board level, and what time and time again we see boards or people reporting to boards asking for, is the relativity of how your security program is going. So security is not absolute. It will never be absolute. So you need to be able to say, hey, here's how effective we are compared to our peers, and we feel like we're ahead of the pack or behind the pack. One last question, Timur, for you. We've spoken a lot about the the customer engagement from a legal perspective, mandating or at least engaging with law firms to discuss security strategies, board level attention, which seemingly is definitely there in the legal industry. What about outside the legal industry, and some of the things that you're seeing both in your industry but also elsewhere?
You mean in terms of the support?
Yeah, exactly. The support, the attention.
Yeah. So the buy-in, I think it's really important from not just from legal or the board, but from every single employee. And this support, you have to really earn it, I've learned. You can't just ask for it and you will get it. It's really complicated. But key things from dealing with this within the last few years is, from my experiences, don't use this scare tactic, because people will get bored and you'll drive them away. You need to show them the progress that has been achieved within the journey and identify exactly what areas that we need to focus on. But the key thing for me is to link everything together, to link your strategic work when it comes to, it could be a business strategy, or it could be a data protection or cyber strategy, with other pieces of work and people. What I have learned is silos can be the biggest showstopper that can slow you down. And if you are not working well with legal, with risk management, with compliance, data functions together, sharing objectives and ensuring that we are completing each other, is going to be really very difficult. 3 lines of defense is a good example. Many organizations use this model to say, okay, the first line will need to do certain things, second line, and then third line will be overseeing the whole thing. What we have suggested is different ways to introduce this 3 lines of defense for everyone to be very flexible, to change their objectives, to change their priorities, and to complete each other, not for the third line to wait and finish what the first 2 lines doing, and then they will come and do internal audit or whatever, and then recommend things that by then probably business have achieved a lot more than what internal audit thinking they are still going to be achieving. So it's about breaking silos, it's about working together, it's about showing to the board where you are exactly and what gaps you have within the internal business processes. I personally use GDPR as a vehicle to say, if we're going to be doing this on personal data, let's just do it on all. Let's just stop talking about personal commercial data. Data is important, all of it. We need to start classifying it. We need to start educating business on the importance of each classification. We need to ensure relevant controls are there with the customized training being provided. So you swap roles with business teams. You try and become a business person with them, understanding not to a lower level of details, but high level their business processes and what they're trying to do, and you teach them a bit of data protection and data governance as well. So what we do is we go every week, we go to a specific team meeting for 5-10 minutes. We sit down and have a chat with them. No slides, no agendas, nothing. Just have a chat, and they will tell us like, oh, by the way, I'm doing this. I've got these issues. How do you advise me going about them? And we keep having these conversations going all the time. Legal, obviously, when it comes to contracts, when it comes to GDPR elements into them, all of these things, the controls. There are so many different scenarios, but you need to get a good understanding of each other.
Yeah, absolutely. I think security is futile without the support of other teams. It's almost a coordination of efforts between compliance, between legal, between the business as well. Excellent, guys, some really interesting insight. Thank you so much. We're actually going to move on to a few questions before we finish. This is your chance, if you have any questions, to submit through the Q&A with the URL that is on the back of the feedback form. We have some that have come in already. I'm going to kick off, and then maybe, Georgie, I'll hand over to you to ask a few. We've spoken a lot today about the challenges that we face this year pertaining to some of the key risks. You know, we mentioned continuity even, and like those things that you don't even necessarily think is the forefront of like security risks, but then also human error. To what extent, you know, those risks are risks that are prevalent always in an organization. To what extent does your security outlook and strategy and posture change in relation to like threats as they evolve? So for example, like 2019 strategy, was that very different to 2020's, or actually is it like these are evolving risks that we just constantly need to be keeping up with, and actually the key themes remain the same? Mark, maybe if you could kick us off.
So my view would be the strategy is sort of looking out to, it's a 3, 5, infinity and beyond type discussion. So that's always going to be a sliding bar anyway. When it comes to threats and as they emerge, I don't think you can wrap that into your strategy because it is always evolving. And I think if you wrap your head around that, if you get too much wrapped around that axle, you are going to slow your strategy down. So my strategy, certainly how we've written it, is we have an overarching technology strategy, and then we have falling out of that a couple of themes. So security is one of them, but they're all pointing in the same direction. Of course, then they also point into what the business strategy is. But when it comes to how you think about threats, you'll have a view. I don't think I'm big enough a player right now to allow threat intelligence to really impact on what I'm trying to achieve. Slightly different when I was at KPMG, we would think about that, and we would think about the environment we were operating in and how we were seeing the practice of sort of accountancy, how that was changing. And that was a threat to us and something we had to think about. So, you know, threats, if they're big and they're going to be sort of organizational impacting, then I might have it in my strategy. If it's low-level stuff, we're seeing more, I don't know, more technically astute phishing campaigns or better hacking events. I don't think I would worry about them in my strategy, just because I'm not big enough right now. Maybe I would have at KPMG, maybe. Mm-hmm. So threat intelligence is a key part of that, but that's sort of BAU, isn't it? And then that's your kind of 0 to 3 months type activity, not your 3 years out activity.
I imagine there's also a huge risk that you get into this mentality that you're always reactive, because you could always be dealing with like the next big thing that has landed in your inbox that morning, and if you ignore the long-term vision of what you're paving towards, that can probably be quite destructive in its own right.
Yeah.
Excellent. Georgie, do you want to maybe go over to the next question?
Yeah. So this question, when you implement new solutions, what sort of pushback do you get from employees and how do you mitigate that? I actually have a few points on this, if I can go.
Answer your own question.
So the first one, I think it kind of relates to what you say. If you improve your security posture and employees are kind of aware that you may be implementing more security tools, then you reduce the sort of chance of pushback. Secondly, there is a rise in tools which are unobtrusive to the user, and if you implement them, again, there's going to be less pushback. And then thirdly, if there is pushback, I think a lot of responsibility falls on the security companies, like Tessian, for example, to empower you guys and give you the right information that should you get pushback, you can handle it effectively and you sort of know what to say based on that specific tool that you're implementing. I don't know if anyone has anything to add on that as well.
From a privacy perspective, I think the privacy impact assessment process is quite key to not getting pushback, because if you're consulting properly, if you're being transparent, you're giving advance notice, complying with any obligations to consult with works councils, you know, if you're giving the right information and you have the right policy framework in place, then pushback should be limited. You know, certainly my experience has been handled properly. The introduction of new technologies should be facilitated by that process.
It's the journey, isn't it?
Yeah.
You go on with users, that actually the introduction of the tool is like it's actually not a big thing. It's just part of like a step.
And
in that
being a
journey.
trusted function as well. So if there's a general perception that the information security teams and the privacy teams, are doing their jobs properly, then there's confidence that these solutions aren't just being implemented without a due process.
Yeah, which again is like an internal sales thing as well as backing up or
Absolutely.
having a strategy. There's one that's come in here before we go on to your next one, Georgie. Jamie mentioned having a modest sized team, and I think this is a reoccurring theme that we hear across the industry is we're short, everyone's short staffed. How do you deal with the like forever changing landscape with a lean team? How do you overcome that? Tim, do you look to technology? Do you look to doing the basics really well?
Yeah, and I think it's a combination of different things. It's a serious issue that we're all suffering from. There are increase in the demand in terms of what you expect from similar teams to us, but the team sizes are not growing as we are expecting. So priorities, obviously, everyone is doing it. We have to change our priorities on a daily basis. Now, the key challenge with this is individuals like us cannot control their priorities if there is a DSAR, if there is a DPIA, if there is a data incident. We have to jump at it and manage that first. So it's a serious challenge. That's why you need to create a very, very good positive environment within the team. You need to focus on the people within the team to ensure that you give them first, don't micromanagement them, but just give them as much space as you can, trust them, create flexible ways of working, and then try and communicate with board, with different groups, key groups within the, and teams within the organization in terms of areas that we need to focus on. And build a business case for justify why do you actually need to increase and what's the impact of not having the resources that you need. But I have to be practical and say I think every single one of us suffering from this. It is really busy and not enough people is the thing that I always hear when I meet my colleagues within the teams. Yeah.
And again, it comes back to Mark's point. It's all about talent. It's not just getting the right talent in seat or having the budget to get the talent, but it's also making sure you're creating an environment for talent to thrive and do their job well. So ironically, it's about looking after the people to look after the people.
Last question.
That was great. We should frame that.
This is a tough one. I don't actually know if there's an answer to this. What would it take for the problem of human error to be solved once and for all, at least from a cybersecurity perspective?
Remove the human.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't think you can remove the human element because that's what makes us good at what we do. You can mitigate against it, but you can never remove it entirely. You have to rely on people to make the right decisions, to use their discretion. Otherwise, you're just employing robots.
We wouldn't want that to happen anyway because Tessian wouldn't exist.
I was going to say, if there's one takeaway for today, to remove human error, remove the human. That's all we've got time for today on the panel. Can everyone give a really big round of applause to the panelists? Thank you. Thank you so much, everyone, for giving your insight. Really interesting and engaging discussion. And also thank you for your continued support and pushing us as a company as well to think about these things. Thank you.